would probably take an average 1-2 grinder playing his A game over an average 25-50 grinder playing his C game any day.
You're listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. Each week, you'll get to peek inside the greatest minds in the game and discover what makes them successful.
Mental toughness separates those that can't handle the stress.
If you're going to treat it like an amateur, you're probably going to have amateur results.
Here are your hosts, Elliot Rowe and Adrian Talenchik Rousum.
Welcome to the show this week. Adrian, great to have you on.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm good. We've got the Mindset Academy running now, so check that out, mindcoachacademy.com, for all of your mind coaching needs. This week, really exciting guest. I've got Matt Berkey coming on. He's been on in the past. Since then, he's had a lot of success. Managed to cash the Super High Roller last year after the show for over $1 million. So, Adrian, take it away.
So today on the show, we have Matt Berkey, a longtime cash game player who has recently been recognized a little bit more for his time spent on the big game and super high roller bowls. But also, he's been actively working to improve the poker community with the Solve for Why Academy. So Matt, welcome to the show. How have you been?
Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me. I've been great. Very, very busy. And I apologize in advance if my puppies start barking any more than they already are. It's a busy house. We're setting up for tomorrow's academy, so there's a lot of movement going on.
Since we had you on last time, I think we spoke to you in the March, you then went on to play the Super High Roller Bowl and actually cash for over $1 million. Talk to us a little bit about like how that was and how that felt.
It was pretty incredible. You know, obviously I had a lot of faith in myself. I took a big piece of myself. Big is relative, especially all things considered now. But no, I took a lot of risk on playing it and investing in myself, and moreover, just putting in the time to prepare. You know, whether there's a direct correlation between the amount of prep work I put in and the result or not, it's really all I have to go off of. So the correlation's there in my mind. And it felt like, you know, the fruits of my labors were compensated for.
When you're headed into a super high roller, what sort of prep are you looking at doing?
Well, that was the first time I had ever really done anything like that. But it was kind of just the stars aligning. I had just developed the academy months prior. It just seemed like it was all predicated off of one night during the summer a couple years ago. I couldn't sleep and I just started writing on my whiteboard. Like, if I were to final table the main event and became a November Niner, how would I capitalize on this opportunity outside of preparing myself for the event? And I just came up with this like laundry list of things that I would want to accomplish. Everything from, you know, hiring out the proper coaches to fill leagues, like with ICM and areas that I don't necessarily consider myself to be the strongest in the world, as well as like, you know, marketing myself in a certain way and just capitalizing on a black swan event. So that was a lot of what the lead up was to the Super High Roller Bowl. I treated it basically like final tabling the main event of the World Series, where it's, I may never get to play this again, so I need to take full advantage. And it ended up resulting in me putting a crew together, going back to Pittsburgh, filming the whole thing, filming all of the work we did leading up, the coaches we worked with, working with Elliot, of course. And we ultimately ended up selling a show.
And what's the news with the show? How's that all going to be coming out?
So depending when you release this, I'm not exactly allowed to.
Oh, okay. So there is a show coming at some point in the future.
Yeah. So it'll be very, very, very soon. I don't know what lengths I'm allowed to give detail. I just know that it's going to launch pre-World Series. That's the best I could say, I think.
Okay. And it's going to have an incredibly handsome hypnotherapist in it as well.
Yeah. We're putting together the last episode right now as you lead off.
And how have you found that sort of move from, you know, playing in the high roller cash games, the tournaments, and then going back to the community and dealing with players who, you know, perhaps are playing 2-5, 5-10, they may be relative novices. How have you found that transition?
You know, I really enjoy it. Like, my background from baseball was me attempting to play the highest levels humanly possible. Like, it was trying to find the path to elite where physically I may not have even been capable. And obviously I fell short. And the first thing that you gravitate towards when you fall short is you want to help somebody else achieve what could possibly be one of their dreams. With poker, I've had a lot more success, and you know, I'm still on that path to attempting to be elite. But there's such a gap, especially in the training market. I think nothing's really closing the gap for people who are just entering the learning curve. there isn't really a direct path to get from entering the learning curve to out of it. There's just a path forward that can kind of propel you. We felt like with what we were creating at Solve for Why, we weren't going to give them the quick fix that everybody else was kind of lending, but instead that path out of the learning curve to where they could start to develop their own strategies beyond what the norm is.
So is that like coming from a cash game background? Do you feel like there's elements of tournament poker that you are superior at or better at explaining than a longtime tournament player?
In some ways, yeah, because I had to find the solve, right? Like, so people who specialize in tournament poker have just kind of been doing the same thing and mimicking one another and continually refining their ability. Well, with me having a cash game background and my strength being in the volume of hands that I'm capable of playing, and I don't mean like 12 tabling and getting hundreds of thousands of hands dealt to me. I mean that of the available starting hands that are dealt to us, I feel like I can play a high percentage of them profitably. So I'm able to increase the amount of hands that I play, which then can increase my return. I don't have to be as patient as somebody else who's only getting dealt 15 hands an hour. So trying to translate that over to tournament play, where being patient is a relative skill set, was very challenging for me. And I kind of had to formulate a side strategy to protect my weakness first before I could start to build upon strengths. And it just like led me down the path of learning to develop a limping strategy, which ultimately taught me a lot of the fundamentals that most tournament players may have already just inherently had.
And that's quite a shift, isn't it, for you as a player? Was that intimidating or was that exciting?
It was kind of unnoticed, to be honest, because you have to remember that I got involved during the boom in 2003, and we didn't like go into this as specialists in any facet. It was, I'm going to play any sort of poker I can get my hands on, right? So I mostly played cash because it was available, but every month when the big tournament would come around, I thought I was the best player in that field too, and I would just play it. And so I had relative success the whole way through, but I never was anywhere near elite at MTTs, where I could see the growth in cash and I could kind of see the leveling off in tournaments. So I just, at one point, I guess I just had a sense of pride wash over me where it's like, if you really want to be elite, you have to start conquering both realms. And you can't just keep beating your head against the wall and saying like, I want to do it this way, so I'm going to. There just needs to be a shift in paradigm at some point where you kind of succumb to the fact that you're playing a different game now. And winning pots doesn't equate to money in your pocket the way it does in cash. So you have to approach it as such.
I think most of our listeners would probably consider you pretty elite, even in tournament play. Was there a big hurdle that got you from being, just this average tournament guy to getting into that elite market?
Yeah. So obviously my heart always has lied with live cash. But towards the middle of 2009, I wasn't doing like great. I had money, but like barely enough to play like 2-5. And that just wasn't what I wanted to do. I knew I was capable of beating 10-20 at the time. So I needed to figure out a way to accumulate money fast. And I was living with Brent Hanks at the time, who was just crushing online tournaments. So he offered to buy a big percentage of my action and basically just put me in whatever I wanted. He gave me a full schedule. And at the time, I don't think I was a winning online MTT player. I was probably break-even-ish. I lost like 20,000 right away, which I think I had like 25% of myself and was a big chunk of my life money. And that was kind of like where the shift started to occur. I went deep in a PLO tournament where there's no antes, so you're kind of incentivized to just limp every hand and just play as many pots as possible that way. And I found a lot of success that way. So I started to like reverse engineer it as best I could as applicable to no limit hold'em tournaments as well. And I started to win. And I started noticing like I'm taking more people post flop and my edge is now shining through and they're getting themselves in awkward spots and it's translating to profit. Once that occurred, then I was able to start like holistically building this strategy. And I was a relative unknown at that point. So when you see a guy limping in the 100 rebuy in 2009, he's just a complete monkey. And the things that would happen from a profitability standpoint, it's like I would limp aces from middle position and it would be 5 bets back to me. And it's just like, okay, I'm all in. And suddenly I was just like beating the toughest online tournaments at a pretty high rate. Like I was winning the 100 rebuy, I was winning the 150 rebuy on full tilt. And it all culminated in me chopping the 750K on full tilt. At that point, I now had 6 figures and I just like left online behind and went back to what I enjoyed.
And did you enjoy? I mean, when you say go back to enjoyed, is that you're sort of a bigger love for cash games, or is that a love for live over online?
I felt like I was an indentured servant during the 6 months that I was playing online. I think I won like $250,000 over 6 months, maybe even a little bit more. And it was just like one of the most miserable existence that it's one of the darkest periods from a life standpoint that I can look back on. I was so unhappy. I was grinding 14 to 18 hours a day. Like, everybody talks about that one area of sacrifice throughout their life that they just had to suffer through in order to achieve the next level. And this was mine for me. And it's crazy because for a lot of people, like, that's not a sacrifice. They would happily do that for days on end, for years at a time, you know? But for me, it's like I lost all sense of normalcy. I really couldn't find time to work out anymore. I was a slave to the schedule of the online, where it's like I'm waking up at 10, I'm firing up my tables by 10:45, and I'm not, if I go deep and stuff, which I had been at the time, I'm not shutting down my monitor till 2 a.m. And then I'm just rinsing and repeating every single day. At 27, that's just no life. So I was happy to have the financial freedom. I then parlayed it into a deep run in the main event in 2010, where I got 43rd. And from there, it was just like, I was celebrating Black Friday the following year, to be honest.
You're a mean man.
It's a little... it's a little regrettable now, but at the time I was thinking like, this is great. We're all going to get paid our online money. All that money is going to transfer into the live realm, and, poker is going to be booming again. What obviously ended up happening is it segregated the European market from the American market. A lot of money was tied up for a long period of time. And I regretted the fist pump I gave when I heard about Black Friday.
I don't think too much of the poker community was fist pumping. I think a lot of the most successful poker players have, turned Black Friday into a positive moment in their life somehow. Sure. But yeah, I haven't heard of that immediate reaction.
Yeah, I might have been one of the few for sure.
You're living in Las Vegas now, right?
Yeah.
So what game makes you, jump off your couch and head down to the casino? Is there a tournament that could run that you're like, hey, let's jump into that? Or is it mostly just the cash games that get your interest?
Yeah, it's weird. Like, Las Vegas isn't much of a tournament capital anymore. Outside of the Aria High Rollers that Poker Central was really trying to like showcase as their flagship series moving forward, there just isn't too much that goes on. Everything else is just Venetian deep stack, and it's really tough to go to the strip for a $500, $200K guarantee. I know the value's there, but I just have so much on my plate with business and like juggling life and trying to be balanced that I guess I'm not like value hunting anymore. So for me to play a tournament, it needs to be worthy of traveling. And there's, the WPT does an amazing job. I look forward to the World Series every year. It still feels like Christmas. I'm pumped to like make my schedule every year. Outside of that, it's like I'm just like scouring Bravo looking for 125.50 or bigger runs.
And I mean, talking about the WPT, you had a very deep run recently in LA. Talk to us about that. How did that feel to be, back in the tournaments again, which is obviously something you don't do too much, and then again reaching the final table? It
was completely and utterly heartbreaking. There was definitely like, it's so hard to hold on to the perspective, but I do my best to like try to maintain that like long-term focus. I know that if I had finished seventh, so I got 15th in that event in 2011. And at the time, it was like on the back end of one of my biggest live tournament heaters. And I remember being like somewhat satisfied. Same thing with like 43rd in the main event in 2010. I was like disgusted to not go deeper, but at the same point, it's like, okay, this is my biggest score to date. I'm really, really satisfied. When you start playing like nosebleeds and pots actually like have an impact on your life, it becomes difficult to like go deep with these massive opportunities on the line and then accept anything less than first place, right? It's like with 7 left, and this is no disrespect to the other people that are still in the event, because I think there were some really good players. Deoxy, who won it, is world class, but it's like I have no choice but to think I'm the best player remaining. And it's difficult not to have the mindset of, okay, all this hard work has put you in position now to capitalize on this and get off the schneid for a WPT title, have your first $1 million score where you have 100% of yourself and like, really take a huge leap forward. To get it in with the absolute stone nuts versus a draw That's the difference between bubbling the TV final table and having like second or third chip stack. Those spots never get old. It can really wear on you when that much equity is changing hands.
I watched your vlog and I saw you reporting on that hand and my heart broke for you a little bit. I know. You just red card.
Yeah. And like, I don't want to sound like a sob story. Like, I don't even expect any empathy for something like this. It's just more of, I guess, the holistic aspect of it. It's like, at the end of the day, it's not going to change my life if I ever win a WPT or not. But the things that I feel like I could possibly do with $1 million as opposed to 100,000 might be drastically different, right? Like, it could have very much fast tracked a couple projects that I have in mind. There's a charitable thing that I've been wanting to do for a few years now, and having that kind of seed money is a really good lubricant to getting the wheels in motion and starting. Otherwise, I'm just like left with the concept, which is kind of where I'm at.
Certainly. I read in one of your blogs that you compared, or you said that both baseball and poker are ultimately rooted in failure. Can you elaborate on that at all and explain how you've overcome this, especially in those moments?
Yeah, so I guess like baseball specifically, I mean, if you're an elite hitter, you're failing 65% of the time, close to 70% of the time. The same's not necessarily true with pitching, but pitching is so much closer to poker, right? Because in any given matchup, the playing field is pretty even just due to volatility and variance. But over the long run, hitters are going to only succeed 25 to 30% against a decent pitcher, which I guess the big comparison is like, it's so difficult to have that long-term viewpoint when there are so many moments that are meaningful along the way. So there are so many singular pots that can shift your path one way or the other. Just like there are so many at bats, like where the game's on the line and as a pitcher, you need to succeed here. Finding ways to embrace that variance and understand that it's not necessarily reflective of skill so much as just math ironing itself out and results regressing to the mean. It's a difficult path to traverse. And that's a big reason why I work with Elliot as well. It's taking the quantifiable, viewing it more in the abstract so that you're able to digest it in a manner in which when it occurs to you, you don't feel like you're being slighted.
Yeah, I think so many people take it personally.
For sure. Poker's a very emotional game until you start to fill in the knowledge gaps, because that's all we have to fall back on. When we lack the understanding of something, we're just naturally defaulted to emotion. That's what's protected us throughout the course of time. That's how we've evolved. So if I don't understand something, if I don't understand how that card got there or how you have a hand that beats me necessarily in math, then my first reaction is anger. And I feel like it's so unjust that this could happen to me when I'm trying so hard.
And I think that's why there's always going to be money in poker. I mean, in live poker, I mean, online things might change, people cheat. But when it comes to live poker, it doesn't matter how good people become theoretically. The control of those emotions, the vast majority of people are still going to get angry. They're still going to go on tilt, and they're then going to play worse than they would have played previously.
It's all relative, right? Like, when you paint the picture such as like what you just have, you're imagining some guy who like just picked up the game and just has absolutely no emotional control whatsoever. But even when you get to the highest levels of the guys who can quantify this game down to like micro decimal comprehensions, these guys still don't necessarily have an EQ in line with their IQ. And though they're able to suppress emotion better, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're dealing with it better.
What happens is, instead of talking about ridiculous blow-ups that people might imagine when they think of tilt, someone starts opening their range wider than they should.
Precisely.
It's these subtle changes where, even if people are very strong players and it wouldn't be something that an amateur would notice watching them play, these subtle changes to the way they play hands they would normally play differently are where the profits for a player like you are.
Absolutely. And that's really all it takes, right? Is understanding that as long as live poker exists and the volume of hands that we're being dealt is so incredibly low that the long run is actually pretty inconceivable. Now, being able to maintain a strategic approach that keeps you profitable every time you enter a pot, while other players are scrambling to fight against the deck, emotion, a poor strategy, poor adjustments, whatever the case may be, all these things that are going to shift them out of profitability. It just creates like these massively large edges that, particularly in cash, when you're playing deep stacked, can result in thousands of big blinds.
So is there anything along those lines that causes you to go a little off kilter, or what's the trick to getting Matt off his game?
I definitely used to have a big issue. It's been a while since I felt this way, but there was definitely a period of time where like I had so much pride in being like the table captain and the chip leader. And this is younger me, right? Like I know everybody talks about this in such a cliche way, but like in your 20s, you're just so full of piss and vinegar that like, you know, you just want it to be a fist fight every time that you're involved in anything. A lot of that just resulted in me really not having a strategy outside of sheer and utter aggression. The more calculated I become and the more that I begin to understand the intricacies of this game, it's very difficult for me to have emotional responses. I guess that there are times where maybe I'm a little too financially exposed. Even that's something that I've like really come to grips with dealing with and being able to use almost to my advantage, right? Like one thing that I feel like I've always been very good at, for better or for worse, and I say that because I constantly put myself at risk. When the time to shine comes because my back is against the wall, that's usually the point in which I'm able to step up and succeed. Whereas when I'm comfortable for a long time, and Elliot and I have worked on this a lot, that's where that complacency would lead to self-sabotage.
Yeah, that's the danger zone.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's easy to be nearing broke and then given a huge opportunity and just like rise to the occasion and just triumph, right? Everybody loves a zero to hero story. But to just be the guy who's doing exactly what's expected of him and consistently just being elite all the time, that's a lot of pressure, and it's a lot easier to just fall back to the norm.
And I mean, you know, with the size of these games, just so the listeners understand, I mean, these are very substantial cash games that you're playing, aren't they?
Yeah, mostly 300, 600, 1200. As of late, they've been a little bit smaller, just 300, 600. But, you know, in either regard, we're talking about six figures trading hands pretty much every session. I would say the average win or loss is probably like 125 in a game like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different world than most poker players are really used to dealing with.
Yeah, and you know, I've been in the game for 3.5 years, and even though I'm selling the majority of my action, even with investors, I'm still not properly rolled, right? Like even like my biggest downswing was $5.5 million, which was like I think like a net $3.5 or $4 million downswing from my peak, and we were on fumes by the end. I was like on my last buy-in, ready to be cut off, and it's like
then you found me, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And it all just trended back in the other direction, and we want it all back. But the scary part about that is that sounds like so much money, like such a disgusting amount of money. It's well within the standard deviation of a swing at that stake level, right? You need hundreds of millions to be properly rolled, and I was capped at 5.5.
And how does that, going into a game knowing that a proper roll for it is maybe $50 million?
It's difficult if you're not accustomed to that, for sure. I think it's advantageous if you are just able to accept your plight in life and do the best you can with the opportunity presented to you. The team of guys that were investing in me have the utmost faith in me, and I appreciate that. And in return, I give them my best effort every time out. I understand that every decision I make is going to be impactful on the role that we have, the business that we're doing with one another. That's basically the way I treat it. Is it's a startup, and it's an underfunded one that has an unbelievable ceiling to it, but the risk of ruin is incredibly high at all times.
Do you think your opponents in the game are adequately rolled, or are they in similar situations to you where they have kind of a team behind them?
I think the businessmen for sure are. I think that's their biggest edge, and that's why so many pros have come into that game and failed. They just simply can't sustain the variance, right? Like no matter how good you are, you're not beyond a standard deviation. And it's like when that downswing finally hits, if you don't have people who believe in you and you don't have the means to accumulate the money, like you're just out of commission. Whereas like the guys who started this game 3.5, 4 years ago, they're there until they're bored. They're not going anywhere. They have plenty of funds. So they don't really have to weigh on the idea of, well, if I call here and I'm incorrect, I only have one more buy-in to this game ever, right?
Yeah.
So they just get to operate the way we do at 5-10.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. What's the average ratio of businessmen to poker pros in these games?
I would say like 2-to-1 businessmen to pros, but it really depends on the lineups. Like the lineups I play in are a lot more pro heavy, but it's also like pros who are doing much better for them. So like in a lot of the lineups I play, I'm going to run into Rast and Roble and Marchese and guys who like are properly funded either through themselves or a team of people investing, whatever. But there are a lot of other pros that are kind of just like there for the picking because they just scrape together a couple 100,000 through a team of other friends and they're just trying to run it up in a shot.
Yeah, and they got to get real lucky in a game where you need 50 million.
Yeah.
With a couple 100,000.
Well, right. It's like, they could play it once and do just fine. But if they have any chance of sustaining and being a part of the long-term crew, you're going to have to accumulate a lot more money because you're not going to win it and still get the invite.
I mean, everyone's listening, this highly, highly experienced and you're offering this coaching. Could you explain sort of what Solve for Why is and the things that you're doing with the live academies and also now with the webinars as well?
Yeah, sure. So the whole premise started basically, I was really into Simon Sinek in like late 2013. I was asked to go back to my alma mater high school and give a talk about, just coming from a very small school and achieving some level of success in a pretty niche career. And whenever I started like researching the ability to do this, first of all, I'd never publicly spoke before. But second of all, it's like for 2 hours, this is a pretty daunting task. So I started like really getting heavily involved in people who were great at their craft of speaking. And I ran into a public speaker named Simon Sinek. He has a book out that says Start With Why and Why Leaders Eat Last. And basically the premise that he has is just that we're naturally designed to kind of ignore the why aspect of our purposes when operating through tasks, right? Like it's easy to take a why-centric point of view in regards to like, why am I here on Earth? But we don't ever ask ourselves like, why do I wake up every morning and go to work? Because the simple solution is because I need money to eat. And from a problem-solving standpoint, we're designed to just identify the problem, which would be the how, and then figure out, or the what rather, and then figure out the solution as immediately and simply as possible, which would be the how. And that's very efficient, and it's gotten us to this point. But with modern day technology and everything, now simple solutions aren't adequate enough because deeper, more involved solutions are going to be much more optimal. This concept of optimizing and heading down that path is kind of like what directed me to start the academy. I felt like the training tools that are out there now are really good, but they're all very much the same, largely inadequate in helping give people direction. So we started Solve for Why Academy, and it's basically a 3-day immersion type academy where people come into my house, we talk strategy for 4 to 5 hours a day, and then they play for 3 hours on an RFID table where Christian Soto and myself commentate over top of it, giving like feedback, telling each individual with every hand that they're involved in what they do right, what they do wrong, etc. And then that's their study metric moving forward. As far as like the strategy construction standpoint, take this why-centric point of view and we start to identify why these problems exist at all, right? So why do you have an issue getting check raised on the river? Let's reverse engineer it and start from the beginning. And what we often find is that there are micro mistakes being made up until that point that are much easier to correct than actually just defending against river check raises. By taking this why-centric point of view, now the how and the what become much simpler, and we're able to give them a thought process that will allow them to expand moving forward in any strategy that they choose to employ. Off of the academy, we basically created an entire learning path. So we didn't want just people to come and be done with us and hope them the best they're moving forward. We wanted to create means of following up and things along those lines. So we have a webinar series that we do every 3 months, so 4 webinars a year. What they serve as is lower barrier of entry financially for people who haven't been exposed to the academy or maybe can't afford the academy, as well as a follow-up for people who have already attended the academy. Then on top of that, they also have the ability to re-attend the academy as an observer. I think it's like a fifth of the price, as well as we're going to be releasing some other metrics in the future that we actually haven't gotten around to yet. So I don't want to make promises I can't keep, but like we have a private forum for former Academy attendees. There's one-on-one coaching. We offer at a discount. Just basically everything to keep people involved in the learning path as long as they need to be.
So interesting. I really like the reverse engineering and even the metric of having them actually play. There's so many people who say, oh, I don't learn from books. I learn from sitting around the table. Well, there you go.
I've attended a number of these. I usually give a talk at the end of them on mindset, and the value that your clients get is so obvious, and the feedback is quite exceptional. So genuinely, anyone listening to this, if you're in Vegas and one of Matt's academies on, and you're a cash game player, it's highly likely you're not as good at Matt at cash games. There's a chance maybe you are, but more likely than not, it will be an incredibly good investment. And if you want to try the webinars as well, that will give you an idea of what these guys are doing. But I've been involved in a lot of training, and I've seen what different companies do, and this is genuinely for professional players, 5'10" and above. People looking to really define themselves and have a chance of reaching the top. And there aren't many people offering that sort of content.
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy. Some of our best students are like 1-2 guys who have just been trapped in the infinite loop of learning, and it's hindered them from making more money, right? Like they were a guy who was beating like 50 or 100 NL online and then had to transition into the live world, and they just didn't have the money to jump to 5'10". Kept learning and staying at 1-2, and then realized like the transition's difficult, so then they learn something new, and they just get caught in this infinite loop. And they come here and it's like, Jesus, you could beat 1020 tomorrow, but they have like 10,000 to their name. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's really what we want to target, is the people who are just like stuck in the learning curve with no real means of getting out and achieving their ceiling. In a lot of ways, that's most of the feedback that we get is, thank you so much. I have clarity moving forward. And that's something that I've greatly lacked for all of these years.
Yeah, and I mean that's huge for a player.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like I've been self-taught. My generation didn't really have anybody to gravitate towards and get mentored by or anything like that. So this is all trial by fire for me. I just understand, I guess, where they're at and how painful of a spot it is to be in when you feel like you're so close, but you're just lacking the answer to like one specific thing that would fast track everything for you. It's like to be able to connect the dots for people in that area. It's really gratifying from my standpoint, but it's also just like really good for the game. Having this kid who's capable of beating 1020, playing 1-2 and just cannibalizing that stake level is really bad for live poker. We need to keep that healthy ecosystem at the bottom where the money continually replenishes and doesn't just get funneled up into a handful of better players. We need to move the better players up in order for there to be a high stakes.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's incredible that the depth of knowledge you have on this, Matt. It's as if you've been around since 2003.
I know, right? It's crazy.
I'm hypnotized listening and actually reflecting on the poker economy and poker community when you're talking.
Where can people find you?
So you can find me on Twitter, well, all social pretty much at Berkey11. You can find Solve for Why information, all social at Solve for Why Academy. solveforwhy.xyz, solveforwhyacademy.com are our site URLs.
Okay, and what I'll do as well is on the podcast page, I'll put a link through to all of those bits and pieces so that if you want to find Matt, just click on the podcast page and you can find him easily and go and check out his stuff. There's some fun stuff going on there. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. Good luck in the Super High Roller Bowl. I know it's coming up very soon. Exciting times, only 300,000 on the table. So,
no big deal. Yeah. I'm way too exposed this year, so we have to win.
Oh, there we go. Backs against the wall. It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed.
That is true.
Get your side bets in now.
Okay, man. Well, awesome to have you on, and we'll have you back afterwards to talk about the win.
Okay, great. Can't wait.
Okay. Cheers, man.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
So a lot of fun to have Matt on again. One of the great thinkers in the game. I absolutely love talking to Matt about poker and hearing his thoughts and the way that he breaks everything down.
I know. I definitely had that moment of just lapse where I was just thinking about what he was saying and processing. And, it's sure interesting to hear somebody who, thinks about poker on a different level.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely levels in this game. And there are a few people out there who can talk about it eloquently. And I think Matt's certainly one of those. He does a better job than I do on a lot of those parts. So, really impressive stuff. And a lot of what he was saying there, take on board. It is serious. There are still edges to be had. Go out there and go for the kill. Matt's made it work. It's possible to still do that, especially live.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, Adrian, where can people find you?
Well, we are fully geared up and the chips are flying during Scoop here. So come find me at twitch.tv/talentchick, where I'm playing almost every day. So if you tune in, you're unless you're running bad, you'll find you'll find.
I hope you're taking some breaks. That's very naughty to be playing.
I do have a few breaks built in. I've learned some things in the last few weeks.
You've listened a little bit. Okay, good. Yeah, so we'll be watching Adrian get her Scoop titles. With my stuff, if you want to check out pokermindcoach.com and check out the new academy that's on the site. It's on this podcast page as well. Tons of content. We're doing live Q&As. We've actually got Matt on this month for a Q&A. So if you have questions for him, join up and you can put those ahead. So guys, we shall talk to you soon. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Mindset Advantage podcast. To get future episodes delivered to you automatically, make sure to subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcasting service. To get any resources mentioned in the episode or to listen to past shows, visit pokermindcoach.com/TMA podcast. Thanks for listening.